Melissa Petty, and I'm going to let her um, introduce herself because she knows her better than I do. So thank you all so much for participating.
Thank you, Kate. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so everybody can see the PowerPoint. Um, I'm Melissa Petty, and I move it to the right screen that gives you some more information about me. So I'm a licensed professional counselor in Virginia, and I'm certified in EMDR, which is eye movement and desensitization and reprocessing therapy. It's specific to trauma, but it also has been applied to depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and a lot of other things, including addiction. Um, I'm licensed by the Board of Counseling since 2015, and I've got my master's from Radford and my bachelor's from Michigan, Saginaw Valley State University. I am a approved supervisor for the therapists who are called, they're in training, so they're residents in counseling, and then also approved for qualified mental health professionals who typically have bachelor's degrees, and then peer recovery specialists are those who have their own mental health or substance abuse issues in the past and have been in recovery and help others now with their learned experience. I've been with the MRC since 2020. I joined during the pandemic and really helped with the mental health response of volunteers and then of others too in the community here with developing a newsletter with Christina Morris, who is the volunteer coordinator for Southwest Virginia MRC. So I've really fell in love with the MRC. I'm glad to be a part of it and glad I'm here tonight. I have my own private practice in Galax, Virginia, and then also worked in the Community Service Board for a number of years. And I'm also a volunteer leader with the Leche League. So throughout my whole career and even in school, self-care, self-care, self-care has been always preached, and no one ever becomes perfect at it. So if you're not perfect at it, welcome. You are human like the rest of us, and we continually have to check in with ourselves to see how we're doing with our own self-care and then learn some new skills, and hopefully you'll be learning a lot of those tonight. So just to kind of start us off with some basic mental health self-care, we need to know what happens when we neglect our self-care. And a lot of times we need self-care in our life because every day we encounter stresses. Sometimes those can be positive stresses like having a baby or getting married. Those are positive, happy things. Having a birthday is a happy thing, but it also comes with a lot of like expectations and pressure and stress. So even happy things can be stressful in our life. And then we also have the negative stress that causes us to feel overwhelmed at times, even sad, hurt, disappointed. Um, that kind of stress is typically on a day-to-day basis. There's nothing that's going to ever take all of our stress away that we have in our life. So it's really about learning skills and how to manage that effectively that work best for us. Because everything that I might present to you, there might not be one thing that you are like, this is the one thing that's going to always work for me. That's typically not how it works. It's nice to have a toolbox of a lot of different tools because at different times in your life, certain coping skills are going to work better than others. It's like just like when you're fixing something, a hammer is going to work with one job, a screwdriver is going to work for another job. We need to have all these different tools in our toolbox to know what are the possibilities that could help us manage any situation or stress that might pop up. So, stress is inevitable, and it's learning to surf the waves instead of trying to fight to not have any waves. Burnout can also happen when we neglect our self-care on a long term, where we let a lot of prolonged and excessive stress like build up, whether it's emotionally, physically, mentally, all of those things can add up to us to lead to us to feel burnt out, where we just stop caring. You stop caring about what happens to you. You feel like you don't want to get up for work or to volunteer anymore. Life kind of loses a little bit of meaning. You still feel bouts of happiness, but in just one area of your life, you just feel like you don't want to keep going on working or volunteering. And so that's typically signs of burnout. And then compassion fatigue can be the next stage if we're not able to manage stress and not able to curb burnout symptoms. Compassion fatigue is really just the diminished ability to feel empathy for others. So in burnout, you don't really care about the job, or you don't really care about, the volunteer work. In compassion fatigue, you stop caring about the people. And the people are usually the most important things that we work with when we're in a helping capacity, or we're in caretaking, or we're volunteers. So it really can have a detrimental cost to not only our own lives, but then the lives of others. So it's really helpful to um, to take the ProQual, what's the professional quality of life scale. And this is something that you can take on a regular basis. It's easily found on the internet. If you Google that, it's a free scale that anybody can use. And it's just a good check-in to see where you are. So to know like where you would be if you're close to some compassion fatigue, if stress is building up, or even if you're in some burnout. So it's a good kind of indicator where you might be. And then lastly, if we ignore the stress, we ignore the burnout, we ignore the compassion fatigue, we can start getting into depression, which is, feeling sad and down, alone, depressed most days of the week for more than 2 weeks at a time. Depression can interrupt your sleep, appetite, concentration. It can make you feel as if life isn't worth living anymore. And depression is a really serious illness that happens over the course of a lot of our lives. Generally, most people do experience some depressed mood at some point in their life. But depression is something that happens for more than 2 weeks, and then it either becomes recurrent, where it's here for 2 weeks and then gone for a week or two and then comes back. And it's kind of like in this cycle where you feel normal for a couple of weeks and then you're sad again. Or it can be concurrent. So it's just chronic, where it just starts for 2 weeks and it doesn't let up. And so it's really important that we take care of ourselves, especially if we have a family history of depression. Then we know that we might carry genetics that make it more likely that we become depressed. Or if we have our own histories of trauma, that can be another contributor to the onset of depression when we have some stressful things happen in our life. So it's good to be monitoring ourselves and how we're feeling, and knowing that we can be preventative with our stress. We can manage it well. We can prevent burnout. We can prevent compassion fatigue, and we can prevent some depression. Um, that can be really helpful to know that we're not powerless here. We do have some ability to take care of ourselves and be preventative and proactive about it. So hopefully that gives you hope to not neglect your self-care, and know a little bit about what can happen when we neglect our self-care. So the biggest barrier that I've seen as a therapist, with colleagues, with myself, with clients, with other people I've worked with in my volunteer work, is that healthy coping skills require boundaries. And a lot of times when we let our boundaries become very loose and not enforce what we need or ask for what we need, we tend this is what gets in our way of doing the things that we know are good for us. Is we sometimes say yes when maybe we should be saying no, or maybe we don't know how to say no to something, or we don't know if we even have the capacity to say no because we have maybe little ones who depend on us and we don't have a choice. But we really need healthy boundaries in order to have healthy coping skills. So what I'd like you to do right now, if you feel comfortable in putting in the chat box, I would love to hear it. Um, but if you don't, then just make a mental note for yourself, or if you have a piece of paper to start as like a journal prompt for later, could be helpful. But if you feel comfortable putting it in the chat box, um, write about or just think about a time that in the past when you tried to implement a new healthy coping skill, what was some of the barriers that you encountered? So you could just like put in the in the chat box, time. Like I just didn't feel like I had enough time in the day. Like that's a big barrier that a lot of people would say get in the way of their ability to do healthy coping skills. So just give you a couple minutes. So I'm really liking a lot of the responses. I don't know if everyone else is seeing these, but some of the responses that I'm seeing right now are bullying, fatigue, fatigue from doing so too much, schedule, others not respecting their decision for healthy coping skills or making healthier improvements in their life, feeling like you can't say no, family not understanding, feeling guilty or giving in. Um, Maybe something that they developed was too complicated. Knee pain got in the way of walking, family pressure, needs of a family, young and old, where you're doing a lot of caregiving, lack of support from employers or coworkers, too many activities to allow for time, not being able to concentrate, not being a assertive communicator, um, it not becoming a priority and staying a priority, maybe feeling overwhelmed by the commitment or by the change in your life, having time constraints, failing to stick to the plan, not getting enough rest, money, support. These are all so many different common things that happen when we're trying to implement something healthy in our lives. Um, I, I want to definitely mention that one of the things was it was just too big, and that I didn't feel like I could um, didn't feel like it was just too overwhelming. I didn't stick to my plan. It was too much all at one time. So I do want to mention that our brains are really, really love routine. They really love predictability. They love certainty. And that's why it's so hard. It was so hard for all of us during the pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of chaos. Nothing was the same before. Everything was different all of a sudden, all at once. And our brains did not like that. Our brains like predictability, consistency, stability, and certainty. And so, in order to have a brain like that and then make a change, we actually have to make very, very small changes. Otherwise, our brain gets, it goes into like a threat response. There's a lot of changes at once, even if they're really healthy for us, like you're like, tomorrow I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to exercise every day. I'm going to eat only fruits and vegetables and lean meats and whole grains. And I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this. They're all healthy things for me. That is great. It's great ambition. And it's super overwhelming to completely change your life in one day and then expect to stick to it. Our brain views that as a threat and that it's not safe. And so your brain is going to actually set up a lot of different traps in order to get you back to what you were doing before because that's the habit it knows. And so I really tell a lot of people in my practice and practice this even myself. There's a book by James Clear called, oh man, I just forgot it. But he wrote a book about habits, Atomic Habits. That's what it's called because I let someone borrow it recently. And in Atomic Habits, he talks about how it's really helpful to make one small change in your life at once. So let's say that you wanted to go and add exercise. You would just want to say, like, I'm going to exercise just for 5 minutes tomorrow. And if I feel like doing more, then I'll do more. And then I'll try again the next day. And it's just a tiny, because everyone can spare 5 minutes. You can spare 5 minutes to go for a walk. So if you can just get your brain to say, well, just 5 minutes, and I can stop at 5 minutes, or I can keep going if I want to. Our brain's not going to view that as threatening, um, as saying like I'm going to exercise an hour every day for the next, the rest of my life. When you haven't exercised at all for the last 6 months, like that's a big change. It's too much all at once and it's very threatening. It's where we won't be able to meet that goal. So we have to start with small, very measurable goals. And it's even better to do what's called habit stacking, which is you pair the new thing next to something that's already a habit. So for example, one of the things that I practiced was when I wanted to start running more consistently in the mornings. I was like, all right, so how am I going to fit this into my routine? So I get up in the morning, I drink my coffee. That was already part of a habit. I'm not going to give that habit up. And so I decided to run after my coffee. Now, there's other people who can't do that, and they decided to run before their coffee, and they use their coffee as their reward after their run. Either way, it's both, however way you do it, in any way that works for you, that's habit stacking. And that's going to make you be more consistent with it. Just like at night, if you wanted to pair like if you're like, I really want to start journaling or just reading like 2 pages out of a book, I would put that to with my habit of brushing my teeth. So if I put those two things together, one thing that's new, one thing that's already an existing habit, I'm more likely to be successful in implementing the new habit. So I did want to point that out because it's not in the presentation, and I thought that that could be helpful. The other things that I've seen in the chat that you all brought up, it sounds like a lot of that is going to be covered with when we're talking about boundaries, because like I said before, healthy coping skills require boundaries. So we will get into that next. So we first need to know what are boundaries. So what are the healthy boundaries that we would need? You know, what do boundaries encompass? So boundaries are for ourselves and others, and we need to set healthy boundaries with ourselves to live a healthy life. So those boundaries, for example, are listed here. So physical boundaries would be the type of boundaries that you set regarding your body, your touch, your space, what you eat, what you drink, when you're active, when you're resting. So you can ask yourself questions like, how comfortable am I being touched by others? Do I let people hug me willingly? Like, am I a hugger? Am I not a hugger? How do I communicate that maybe I don't like hugs? I know in my practice, I usually will say like, I'm okay with hugs as long as you ask me first and you wait for me to say yes. So that way I'm making sure that they, one, are asking for consent because I think that's a good thing to practice. And two, they're waiting for their response. And if for some reason I, can't hug that day because maybe I have a cough or something, I don't want them to getting close to me, even if I'm wearing a mask, I would just say, no, not today. But, maybe next time when I don't have a cough, then I can give you a hug. And I think that's a good thing to practice. So that way, you are clearly communicating what you're comfortable with others, and others are getting that practice of hearing boundaries communicated to them. So not only can you look at it as anytime you're setting a boundary that you're practicing for yourself, but you're also helping to model what that looks like to somebody else. And then the whole experience of a boundary being respected or possibly not respected or possibly ignored. So boundaries can be very complicated, but they are very helpful. So more boundaries would be emotional boundaries. So emotional boundaries are the types of boundaries that you set regarding what you're comfortable sharing with emotionally with others. So these are things like deciding when to share, what to share, when to take time for yourself, deciding your capacity for listening and supporting others, what you're comfortable with sharing with others. And so a good question could be, who do you turn to when you need to discuss something private or personal? Who are you not comfortable with sharing personal things with? I think we can all think of some people in our lives that we've maybe told something small to, and then find out that they've told somebody else. And we've learned through that experience that that person might not be someone we want to share our personal experience with anymore. We might want to save those personal topics for someone who has shown us that they can be trusted with that, to not talk about those things with other people. So you'll notice that these emotional boundaries are really checking in with ourselves to see like what we're comfortable with, and then making our own decisions and setting boundaries with ourselves to say, this person I will share information with because they've shown me that they can be trustworthy. And this person, I'm going to set a boundary with myself to say, I'm not going to share my personal information with this person because they've shown me to not be trustworthy, and to share a lot of the things that I've told them before. So another good question for emotional boundaries would be, how will I make space to process my own emotions so that when I share, I'm not just dumping my problems onto somebody else? So this can be a really good question to ask yourself, and then really to talk to with the important people in your life, even coworkers or other volunteers. Sometimes it's just as simple as asking the other person, hey, I'm really needing to talk to you about a lot of things on my mind right now. Are you in a space to give me a listening ear today? Like, do you feel like you're emotionally capable of doing that? Or do you think that I need to find somebody else to talk to today? And then hopefully if the person is emotionally intelligent and knows to ask this question, they'll say like, sure, of course you can. Do you want me to just listen and let you vent, or are you looking for me to problem solve with you and help you solve this or whatever's going on? And then that can give you the opportunity to say, well, actually, I just need to vent. I'm not looking for solutions because I don't think there are solutions to this problem. It's just more about talking about the stress in my life. Or they might be, yeah, actually, this is a problem and I really do need your help in solving this. So these are emotional boundaries that we kind of navigate in our relationships, but it does take a lot of emotional intelligence to have these conversations and just some information about like what emotional boundaries look like. So time boundaries are another thing, and that's one of the things that we mentioned was a huge barrier for some people implementing healthy coping skills, is that their time wasn't respected by others or maybe their schedule. So time boundaries are boundaries that you set for yourself regarding how much time, how you prioritize your time, what your time is worth. So you can ask yourself a question like, how much time would I like to reserve just for myself every day or every week, or a set amount of time? Um, I know that in my life, I really like to take that morning coffee as my quiet time, my moment where I don't have any obligations to anybody, and it's just for myself. But I also use different times for, like, example, for the running. That's another good way that I would say that that's how I prioritize some of my time. Um, Another question would be what takes priority when you're dividing up your free time? So there might be times when you might have competing priorities. Let's say your kids have a choir concert that you need to attend, but then your husband has something important on his schedule too that he would want you at. Like, how are you going to manage all of that at once? And it is really trying to say like, okay, how do I prioritize all of these things? And how do we make it work? And who else can I call in for support when I'm being pulled in all different directions with an impossible decision? Um, so those can be really challenging too. We might have to really examine like what are our priorities at every different moment. Another question would be like if someone asks you to collaborate or work together professionally, what do you charge per hour? Like, or how will you decide to take on extra projects or volunteer opportunities to devote time to? We want to be able to go ahead and say yes to things that are really important to us and also do it with the amount of time we have to not feel like we're failing or not doing a good enough job. So I think a lot of times when we get down on ourselves, it's because we didn't allot enough time for us to like really think through and plan and coordinate and implement. Those are the things that get in our way, and we can feel a little bit down on ourselves when we don't allow ourselves enough time to do something that is important to us. So another type of boundary is sexual boundaries. So those would be about consent, establishing communication patterns, setting rules about safety. So questions that you can ask yourself about your sexual boundaries would be like, how do you communicate consent? Um, do you communicate it non-verbally? You know, how does your partner communicate this? What types of intimacy are you comfortable with? And what about your partner? Um, you know, what are your limits in sexual safety? So a lot of that can be explored within a relationship or a partnership. So those are questions just to be aware of that, you know, you do have these sexual boundaries and it's important that you're aware of them. So one thing that I always like to really make sure that, you know, people know is that, you know, if someone is inappropriate to you in public or other places, that you do have the right to tell them no, and that you are the ultimate deciding factor of who touches your body or not. Um, Intellectual boundaries, those ones are related to our thoughts and our ideas. So it's things like how we respond to someone not respecting our ideas, or how we communicate to others, or when we discuss something versus when we know it's not a good time. So questions to explore our intellectual boundaries would be, you know, what does respecting ideas and other perspectives than mine mean to me? So, what behaviors from others will make me feel like my ideas are being heard, or are they being diminished or even dismissed? And what do I do to take care of myself when that happens? Especially with the holidays, you know, we had Thanksgiving and now we're having these holidays coming up, and we will be a lot of times tested by our family members and friends regarding our boundaries about perspectives or ideas. So, how are we setting boundaries about when our ideas or our opinions are being dismissed or even, you know, kind of taken to maybe being made fun of or ridiculed? How are we going to set boundaries to make sure we can keep ourselves safe in those situations? And it may just be as simple as, you know, I just think that we're not going to be able to agree on this. We have what radically different ideas, and we might not have to talk about this if we want to preserve this relationship. I think it might be better if we focus on our relationship and what we like about each other rather than getting involved in discussing and debating things. Some people love debate and they don't need a boundary with that. And the people who love debates can find each other and have that debate together. For the people who don't want to have that debate, want to enjoy their meal and prefer more solitude, that's okay too. They can set healthy boundaries to take themselves out of that situation. Other questions to ask for intellectual boundaries would be, how will I show others I respect their ideas and perspectives? Maybe it's just as simple as saying, I'm really happy that you shared that. Or just saying like, thank you for sharing that with me. You don't have to go into great detail and to know that you respect someone. I think it's mainly just showing that you care and you listen listen to them about what's on their minds, because we really like when other people do the same for us, as long as we're doing it in a very healthy and respectful way. So another question would be, what will signify to me that it's time to walk away from a discussion? So are you okay with friendly debates? Are you okay with heated debates? Do you prefer to remove yourself from conversations for heated conflict? How will you communicate when it's time for you to remove yourself from a conversation? And how will you communicate that your ideas aren't being respected? So those are good things to kind of prepare and consider, because a lot of times when we're in the moment, it's hard for us to set those boundaries because we've not thought about being in this situation. So getting clear on what your boundaries are can be very helpful for helping to kind of plan, like, how am I going to handle this? What's worked in the past? What hasn't worked in the past? What do I want to try in the future that maybe I haven't tried before? Material boundaries would be things about like your material possessions, your home. So what can I afford to share? What am I willing to share? How will I share what I have if I want to? Who will I share what I have if I want to? And what I will I not share no matter what? So there's also spiritual and religious boundaries and non-negotiables. Non-negotiables would be just something that's just like a lot of times in like more relationships, like I'm not going to be I'm not going to have an intimate partner who's a smoker. Like that's a non-negotiable. But there are other non-negotiables too. So you can kind of think about what would be healthiest for you. And just know that boundaries are there to protect not only our time and energy, but they also help to protect our relationships, because they make us examine our own limitations and they really challenge us to communicate what we're okay with and what we're not okay with more directly. And that just helps prevent miscommunications and misunderstandings and any built up resentment. So boundaries are super important and helpful. And it takes practice. So if you're not perfect at it, it's okay. It takes a lot of practice to get better with boundaries. So here's some examples of boundaries that just statements that you can to kind of affirm what you probably already know, that it's okay to say no to things that you don't like. It's okay to say no to things that don't contribute to your growth. It's okay to say no to things that rob you of valuable time. It's okay to say, I'm going to spend time around healthy people and reduce the interaction with people who drain my energy. It's okay to protect your energy against people who threaten your sanity or mental health. Um, it's okay to practice positive self-talk. And the positive self-talk would be a boundary with yourself that says, I am not going to be on the list of all the people who have disrespected me. I'm not going to be one of them. I'm going to talk to myself in the way that I should have been talked to in all those situations where maybe I was disrespected. So that's a boundary with ourself that we can practice. I'm going to allow myself to feel and not judge my feelings or emotions. I'm going to allow myself to forgive myself when I make a mistake. I'm going to actively cultivate the best version of myself, and I'm going to turn off my phone when I need to. I think that our phones sometimes give the illusion that we need to be available 24/7, and that is not the case. Before our cell phones, there were plenty of time when we were completely unavailable, and that was okay. And we still need to set those boundaries with ourselves to turn off our phone at times. More boundaries would be I'm going to sleep when I'm tired. I'm not going to keep pushing myself when I'm exhausted to keep going. I need to value my sleep and my rest. I'm going to mind my business. That's a big boundary too, because it can be really tempting to know a lot of about other people's lives because it creates a great distraction from our own. And so if we can set the boundary with ourselves to mind our own business, then that can make our lives a lot more peaceful. More I can make tough decisions because they're healthy for me. I can create spaces for activities that bring me joy. I can say yes to activities that interest me despite my anxiety. Um, I can experience things alone instead of waiting for the right people to join me. I can coach myself through awkward or difficult moments. I allow myself to make mistakes and without judging myself harshly. And I don't call myself names. I don't make mean comments about myself, either in my mind or out loud in front of others. Um, so a lot of those came from the book. At the bottom, I put the source. So it's called Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself. And it is a wonderful book all about boundaries that I highly recommend. It also has a workbook with it that's really great too. So if you want even more information about boundaries, that is my go-to source. So someone had said like, well, how do I communicate these boundaries? So it's hard. It can feel very, very difficult when we want to communicate boundaries. Um, but we feel maybe the person doesn't want to hear us, or we feel like just uncomfortable because we were just not used to doing it, or maybe in the past when we've tried to set boundaries, it didn't go well and it makes us a little bit fearful or anxious. Um, I would really encourage you to keep trying because the right people are going to listen to your boundaries and they're going to hear you and want to know what your boundaries are. So, when you're communicating a boundary, first you need to identify where the boundaries need to be set. So, in what parts? Is it just one boundary that needs to be set, or is it a little bit more complex where there's maybe multiple boundaries that need to be set? Um, State your needs very clearly and directly. So when you're going to communicate your boundaries, you have to know what you want. And sometimes that's the first question to say, like, what do I want out of this relationship? What do I want out of this work? What do I want out of whatever it is you feel like you need some more boundaries? And maybe it's what do I want when I'm implementing these new coping skills? Where have I gone or where has it gone wrong before? And I need to kind of be proactive to say, I need this, and this is what I want, and this is what I need. And then be very consistent in upholding your boundaries and repeat them as often as needed. So generally when anyone is hearing something new, they have to hear it at least 9 times to remember. So if we can keep that in mind when we're talking to other people about our boundaries or about what we need, if you can remind yourself that this person needs to hear this 9 times before they will get it in their head and remember. And so it can be super frustrating to know that, but it is very helpful. So it can give you a little bit more compassion to know like it's okay to repeat yourself. It's going to take some time and eventually it will sink in. Um, for an example, one of the things that I try to teach my kids, because kids are very concrete and they want things a certain way, and that's just how kids are. It's how all humans are, right? So a lot of times they're seeking perfection exactly the way that they want it. So one of the things I remind them when things aren't perfect, I'm saying, well, it's good enough. We're just looking for good enough here. We don't need perfection. And so I've said it so many times to my kids that a lot of times when something does go wrong or that's not exactly the way they want it, they kind of just shrug their shoulders and be like, oh, good enough. And it's like they kind of just keep going. But it took all that repetition for them to be able to accept that, things aren't going to be perfect. We can't expect that. It's too much. We don't live in a perfect world and we're not perfect people. So expecting perfection is not realistic. So if we can I model that with ourselves too, which is a really good thing, and with others, if we can strive for good enough and not perfection, it can help us with communicating these boundaries. It can help us with repeating the boundaries. It can help us with implementing these healthy coping skills. We're not looking for perfection. We're just looking for good enough. Um, and two, knowing that if you can think about the 1% rule, so, or the 1 degree rule. So if the example I like to give people is that if you if you have two different planes, in one plane, at the very beginning, they have the same coordinates and they take off from the exact same airport, but we just change 1 degree in one coordinate for one plane. This plane's going to go this way and this plane's going to eventually go this way because that 1 degree makes a difference. And that's what all we're looking for is 1 degree of change or 1% of change over time that makes a really lasting difference. Because in the beginning, saying like, I'm just going to walk 5 minutes every day, like that's just a tiny percentage of your day that can lead, if you do it consistently, that 5 minutes gets easier and easier and you enjoy it more and more and more. And you find that you can walk a lot more, a lot longer, like an hour a day. So it does make a difference. So I don't get hard on yourself when you're not perfect at this and keep communicating those boundaries. Um, so there's some examples here, like I want you to stop asking me the same question when I've already given you the same responses each time. Um, I want you to ask me what I'm feeling instead of assuming that you know. I need you to take the kids to school so I can exercise in the morning. I need you to call me before you stop by. I expect you to be here when you say you will. Those are all healthy boundaries that you probably do set in your life, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. Those are just good ways to communicate what we need in our life. Oops. Okay. So, types of self-care. So we'll move into self-care since we have talked about boundaries. And then if you think of more questions about boundaries you want to ask in the Q&A portion at the end, jot them down, and then we can get to them at the end. So the different types of self-care are nurturing the body. And so that's really using our body to calm our mind. And this can be done through meditation, progressive muscle relaxation, exercise, or massage. Um, and then we have, and I'm going to go through each one of these types after we introduce them. So nurturing the mind, so it's using cognitive restructuring to challenge negative thoughts and replace these with more helpful thoughts. Nurturing our emotions, using our self-awareness, expression, and communication, like journaling or using these healthy communication skills for boundary setting. Nurturing the self and the spirit. So it's using affirmations and keeping promises to yourself about doing things you enjoy and find helpful in your life to feel a sense of control and self-confidence and peace. So we'll start off with nurturing our body. There's a lot of different ways that we can do this. I've got a lot of ideas at the end of the slide. If you want to, while I go through this, we can go ahead and add your other ideas for nurturing your body in the chat box. And I'd love to see what else everyone has to add. And then we'll end this slide with a mindfulness meditation. So we'll just do a short one. But nurturing the body can look like focusing on your breath. So taking time just to notice your breathing without changing it. It's really just drawing in your attention to your breath without having to change it in any way. And after you start doing that a little bit, then you can move towards actually slowing your breath down. So that way you're breathing in for 8, and then you're letting go for 8. If you want to take a really deep breath, some people like to do more like the 5, 7, 8, which is you breathe in for 5, you hold for 7, and you breathe out for 8. So you can slowly transition to that type of breathing after noticing just your breathing without changing it. A body scan is sitting down, and I like to do this when I'm laying down, or you can do this sitting up too. It's basically you close your eyes and just kind of scan your body from the top of your head all the way down to your toes and noticing any parts of your body that are tense or maybe feeling a little bit tight, and then breathing through that tension so that way you can practice letting go and releasing it. With progression muscle relaxation, it's very similar to the body scan, except when you're going through those tense muscles and you're noticing where you're tense, you're actually going to actively like squeeze them and tense them and then let them go. So that way you're noticing how the tension feels, and then you're noticing how relaxation feels in each part of your body. And with meditation is another way you can nurture your body, and it's turning your attention inward. Mindful eating would be like eating something very slowly. A lot of times I'll have people chew like a mint or hold a mint in their mouth and kind of just have how it feels in your mouth, the texture, the taste, any sensations. You can do this with fruit too, like strawberries or apples or grapes. Those are great ways to practice mindful eating where you're just focusing on the eating. You're not focusing on your phone, not focusing on anything else. You're fully engaged in the act of eating and noticing what you're eating and the flavors. Other ways to nurture your body would be yoga, exercise, massage, acupuncture, baths, showers, washing your face or your hands, your nails, taking care of your hair, putting lotion on your skin, meal prepping for the week, drinking enough water, making your favorite meal. Someone in the chat put heating pad. That's another great way to take care of yourself. It's really, it can be helpful to nurture our body. So, for example, you're feeling completely overwhelmed, you're overthinking, you feel like your thoughts are racing, something has happened, or you had a long day at work. It can be really helpful to move your body or nurture your body in some way in order to help relax your body. That way your mind can follow. So a lot of times what happens if we can't calm ourselves down by our own thoughts, then or talking to someone, sometimes we have to engage our parasympathetic system and start calming our body so that way it'll engage that system and then it'll calm our brain. Some people are adding to the chat for their ideas for nurturing the body, which is through music and reading, aromatherapy, candles, going for a walk, washing the car. It's great exercise and great kind of a mindfulness practice where you're engaged in one thing. Then dancing is a great way to nurture your body. So there's a lot of different ideas that you can take for whatever works for you. People who use wheelchairs also can do chair yoga. There's a lot of great YouTube videos on different things. Sleeping, naps are also great ways to nurture our body. A lot of times, if we're feeling overwhelmed or stressed, we check in with how are we hungry? Are we angry? Are we lonely? Are we tired? So that's called HALT. So hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And you'd be surprised at how much of the problems can be solved to see like, well, am I hungry? Like, is it something that have I not eaten enough today? Am I angry about something? Do I need to talk to someone about this or set a boundary? Because a lot of times our anger is an indication that maybe a boundary's been crossed. Are we lonely? Do we need some connection with somebody? Or are we tired? Do we need a nap? So that's another good way to check in with ourselves and nurture ourselves. So we are going to transition to doing the mindfulness activity. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to get comfortable wherever you're sitting. If you're sitting or laying down, somewhere where it's relaxing would be good, where you feel rooted and safe and comfortable in your seat. So then once you're settled, I want you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a deep breath in through our nose and then out through our mouth. So we're going to inhale for a count of 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to exhale for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I want you to keep trying to keep your breathing at this slow pace. So 4 in and then 4 back out. And then as you inhale, I want you to say the words or just imagine what breathing in calmness, what breathing in peace, what breathing in strength would feel like. And then when you're exhaling, I want you to imagine breathing out anxiety and stress and worry. So know that there's nothing for you to worry about right now in this present moment. And all there is to do in this present moment is to breathe. So if you can imagine when you are breathing in that calmness and peace and strength, imagine what color that looks like breathing in. And then when you're letting go of the anxiety with each exhale, imagine what that oxygen looks like. What color would it be if you were going to give anxiety a color leaving your body? So as you're breathing in and out for that count of 4, if your mind begins to drift to any type of worry, you're just going to be mindful and notice it. You don't have to judge it. And then we can bring our attention back to our breath. Sometimes we need the reminder that we're strong and we can handle anything that life throws at us because you've already handled so much already and you're still here. So just notice how calm you feel just sitting and breathing. And another thing to notice is that the breath is always there with you. So if you ever feel alone or that you can't count on anything, you can always go back to your breath because it's been there since the day that you were born and it's still here. It's never abandoned you. Sometimes we can take solace in knowing that. So when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes and you can hopefully keep this feeling of relaxation with you. If you didn't feel relaxed through this, that's okay. Sometimes it does take us some practice to get comfortable with relaxation. A lot of times we're very rushed and feeling relaxed can feel very foreign to us. I know that when I started practicing meditation, or even learning about it in grad school, I was like, oh, this isn't for me. This isn't helpful. And then slowly I learned that it is very helpful and um, that it is important that we take time for ourselves. And we do feel better when we focus on our breathing and get enough oxygen. So I encourage you all to keep trying it, even if you don't feel like it's for you. With time, it does get easier. And know that nothing's ever going to be perfect. So we're never going to be complete masters at meditation or anything. We just always are striving for good enough. Okay, so nurturing, we'll move on to nurturing the mind. So your brain may be in the habit of like automatically going into a negative space or a negative thought pattern. Um, these are just habits, and we can definitely move through those habits. But first, we have to recognize what we're saying to ourselves that can be getting in our own way. So our thoughts are super powerful and they do have an effect on how you feel and what you do. So thinking about your thoughts is actually called metacognition, and most of the time we rush through our day without really even questioning or examining our thoughts. So sometimes practicing the affirming thoughts can be helpful because of neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity means that our brains are pliable, like we can connect new neurons and produce different pathways in our brains every day. And that's actually what makes therapy effective. We do that in therapy. You do that anytime you learn something new. At first, it's super hard and difficult because we don't have the neural connections in our brain to make it easy. But the things that we do over and over again, it makes our brain to make faster connections and we have more connections the more we do it. So the more that you're practicing something, just like when maybe you were learning to walk, most people learn to walk. So when you were learning to walk, it was super hard, you stumbled a lot, it wasn't easy, and now we walk all the time. Most of us do, and we don't even think about it because we have the neural pathways that allow us to do that as long as our body has the capacity to do it. So there's other things that you can say that are really easy for you because you've had that practice. And this is the same thing when we are learning something new, whether it's how we think or how we think about our thoughts, we have to keep practicing and practicing and practicing so we're building stronger and stronger connections. So over time, we will have the we'll have more awareness of that negative thought that maybe we would go to automatically before, but we might say like, actually, I'm learning this new thing that I'm going to practice, so I'm not going to go down the pathway of the negative thought. I'm going to take this different route. And so if you can kind of think about these negative things that maybe you've said to yourself or about situations that aren't helpful, they're not helping you feel good about yourself, they're not helpful, helping you make a good choice. Um, you can basically think of them as like old tapes from the past, and like, oh, those are the old tapes that I played and I've heard before. And really, I know that song isn't helpful for me, so I'm not going to keep playing the old tapes over again. I'm going to make a new tape until replay that new tape over and over again until it becomes more automatic. So first you have to recognize like what are your negative thoughts that pop up the most. And sometimes they happen when we're tired, when we're hungry, when we're frustrated, when it's been a long day, like when we're more emotional. And those are the times when we need to notice those things because that's when we'll notice the things that are kind of like our underlying beliefs. And so we have to ask those questions about that. Does it contribute to my stress? Where did I learn this thought from? Is this a logical thought? Is this thought true? So it can be really helpful to answer those questions because you'll find that if you ask a lot of people about what their negative thoughts about themselves or about situations are, you see recurring themes. So a lot of times people are saying like, I don't feel like I'm good enough. I don't think I'm worthy. I don't think I'm deserving. It's all my fault. I'm not adequate enough. That's usually has something to do with, something defective being wrong with them at some level. And the way that I challenge to help people challenge this with is to ask these questions, yes, but then also like saying, okay, so if we're going to say this about ourselves, would we say this to a newborn baby? Would we say to a newborn baby, you're not worthy? Like, we're not going to go into like a nursery and say, like, this one's worthy and this one's not worthy. Like, you would think I was a horrible person if I did that. We have to remind ourselves that we were once that baby and nothing has changed. We were born worthy, we were born good enough, we were born deserving, and nothing has changed about that except what the world maybe has told us that wasn't true. Um, so I think we can kind of like if we go from that basis, then it can be really helpful to combat those negative thoughts. And really decide like, how can I believe that everyone else is good enough and everyone else is worthy and deserving, but I don't think that for myself? Like, I think I need to challenge and evaluate that and maybe decide, explore in therapy, like where that came from and how I can continue to see it pop up in my life. I like to tell people that sometimes these negative patterns are like, it's like playing whack-a-mole. Like you'll be like, I see it here, but then it popped up here, then it popped up here, and we kind of have to see like all the different spots it pops up. But the more that we have that awareness of it popping up, the more we can say like, I'm not gonna keep playing those old tapes again and again. I'm gonna use these new tapes in these different situations where it pops up, so that way I can go in with more awareness and more intention to help myself to feel better. Another way to nurture your mind is to journal. So journaling is a great place to evaluate some of these negative thought patterns. It's a great place to practice radical self-compassionate self-talk, where we practice talking to ourselves the way that we would talk to just like one of our kids, a loved one, a family member, a friend, talking to ourselves from a place of saying like, yeah, this is really stressful and it's really hard and I have really high expectations and I'm trying my best and I'm going to keep trying again tomorrow. And I know that like my best is going to fluctuate. It's not going to stay steady all the time. It's going to be better some days than others because my sleep is going to vary. My appetite might vary. My capacity for taking on new things or regulating my emotions might vary. So it's okay to vary different days, and my best is going to be different at different times. So imagine like how you might feel about yourself if you talk to yourself like you do your best friend. I think most of us would feel better if we talk to ourselves that way. So then nurturing our emotions. So we want to nurture our emotion or yeah, our emotions. We need to have healthy guidelines. We need to know how to clearly and effectively and directly express our emotions. So generally healthy communication occurs when we're assertive. So it means that you're reflecting both you and the other person matters. Passive aggressive, aggressive, and passive communication generally lead to one or more people in the conversation feel as if they don't matter. So it can be helpful to practice using the guidelines of I'm going to stop, I'm going to breathe, and I'm going to reflect and choose. So sometimes when we're feeling very emotional about a situation and we need to set a boundary, it's very good for us to say, well, give me some time to think about this. So, and it could just be a couple minutes, or I'm going to go use the bathroom, or I'm going to go here for just a second. I'm going to come back to your question because you can take that time to say, I'm going to stop and I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to really think about like, okay, how am I feeling this situation? What do I want the outcome to be? And then how can I choose to communicate that in a way that conveys that both that I matter and that they matter too. So using statements like I can be very helpful in avoiding the statements that start with you. Because a lot of times when I say, you made me feel this, someone else is going to start getting defensive and they're not going to hear a word past of anything else I say, no matter how kind it is. Like if I start with you, people go on the defensive and it's very difficult. So it's much more helpful and non-threatening to say, I statements. So I feel really sad and disappointed when you make when you cancel the plans. Um, or I'd rather like we work together and find a solution that works for both of us so it doesn't have like an ongoing conflict in our relationship. So you're conveying to the person that you know how you're feeling and what you would prefer out of this situation, but also that you're on the same team. Like you are setting this boundary to help the relationship, not to control them or not to like hurt them in any way. Like you want to have a relationship with this person, and this is something that you feel like could be helpful in it. They still have they still have the power to say no, like, and that's okay too. You might have to decide like, where do I go from here? Like, what are my options? Am I and a lot of times, like our options are like we accept the situation for what it is. We continually try to advocate for change, or we, decide to leave the situation. So a lot of times we have three different options. Sometimes there's more than that. It just depends on the situation, but there's oftentimes more than just one option. Um, but we don't sometimes like the other options that we're given. We want it to be our first option, and that can be hard too. So nurturing ourself. So practicing affirmations for self-care, like I deserve to take care of myself. Um, One of the things that I like to remind people is that especially if they're starting to eat more fruits and vegetables and lean meats and whole grains, they want to eat healthier without depriving themselves. I really encourage them to use the affirmation of this is one of the ways that I show my self-respect. This is the one of the ways that I'm respecting myself is by giving my body really healthy food so that way I feel better. Um, I'm not saying that you have to do that all the time. Again, we're not looking for perfection. We're just looking for good enough. Like it's good enough to eat healthy 80% of the times and not healthy 20% of the time. Like that is completely good enough. We don't want to go to any extremes. We want balance because balance is where we find the most health, just like with anything. So I always tell people like if too much water can be harmful and deadly, and too little water can be harmful and deadly. And we need the right balance of water, just right. And we know naturally how we can do that. It's the same apply to anything. Too much or too little is not where we find a comfort. We need a healthy balance of somewhere in between where a lot of us feel good. Um, Another affirmation would be I'm not required to be perfect. I'm trying my best. My needs can be met even by me when no one else can. I deserve to be loved. I deserve to be happy. May I accept my strengths and my weaknesses. But other ways you can nurture yourself is to add, to practice any spiritual or religious beliefs, creating an environment that's peaceful to you. Some people thrive in having a messy area. Other people, like, that is really stressful and it's overwhelming. And so they have to have a very neat and organized environment, and that's peace to them. So knowing that you can create an environment that's peaceful to you, and it's going to look different um, depending on who you are and what you prefer. Nurturing yourself can mean taking breaks and engaging in leisure, like making time for rest, making time for fun, making time to just be without any obligations. Um, and knowing that I see the comment here that if I do something for myself, it's not being selfish and taking anything away from my family. And that is absolutely right. Setting boundaries and taking time for ourselves sometimes can make us feel a little guilty and a little selfish. And I think that it's okay to feel those feelings while also knowing that you can't pour from an empty cup. If we use the oxygen mask analogy, like when you're on an airplane, like you put your oxygen mask on first so that way you can help other people. Like we have to do that for ourselves, because if we burn ourselves out and we don't take care of ourselves, we are of no use to anyone else, including our family, including our kids. Like we have to take care of ourselves. We're not going to be showing up in those relationships the way we would like, the way that they would like us to. And I think that's something really good to model for other people, to say, I really value taking care of myself and I value you. So I think that it's really important that we both take time for ourselves and we find a way to balance that with our family and our obligations, and knowing that we can work through those feelings of self-imposed feelings where we feel selfish and guilty. Um, and but it's necessary to take care of ourselves and set those boundaries. And it's just the same as like setting priorities and making a schedule. We can set up a plan and plan for anything and implement it and make it work out. We just have to know what we want, what our priorities are, and what other people, how we can navigate that with other people too. It may be that if you're in a family or in some type of group setting, it may be sitting down on a regular basis saying like, okay, here's what our priorities are. Here's how things are going. Let's check in with each other. Like, how are we doing? What needs are you of yours are being met and unmet? What needs of mine are being met and unmet? And so we need to do this on a consistent basis in our relationships, whether it's work or volunteer or in our family or other relationships. That way we can make sure everybody's needs are being met instead of things kind of going under the radar and not being talked about, because sometimes um, that's what we've been trained to do in our upbringing. And then finally, nurturing yourself can look like seeking support from friends or family or even other resources too. So it looks like I've asked you all to put some ideas in the chat box for any affirmations. Um, so if you can add any other ones that you can think of that might be helpful, it's always interesting to see what everyone shares, because you all have some really great ideas and experience too. Here's one. It might not have been intentional to be an affirmation, but it can be used as an affirmation. I've learned that it's okay to do for myself. And it took me years to get into this practice, and that's okay. Um, or the quote, ladies, fill your cup and serve others from your overflow. Um, Writing 3 things that you're grateful for every day can be a great way to practice affirmations. Um, have fun your way. I'm taking care of myself in order to take care of others. Before I go to sleep, I'll remind myself of some of the good things that happened today. I'm going to make sure that I have my medical checkups and inoculations, vaccines. So taking care of, respecting your body and taking care of it. So an affirmation with that would be like, I intentionally make time to devote to taking care of my health. So those are some really great ideas. So when do you need to get some support from outside? This would be that if you're noticing that you're having some difficulty in your ability to perform your daily tasks, such as you might be missing work, you might be getting behind on housework, forgetting important dates, having difficulty caring for yourself or your children. Like these are signs that say that we're going to need a little bit extra support. Another sign would be that you notice your relationships are becoming more strained due to your symptoms. Like if you're, you know, sleeping a lot more, not sleeping at all, eating less, eating too much, you're feeling like you can't concentrate, you're feeling more down and depressed, leading you to not be able to, take care of some things. Those can put strains on your relationships. So or if maybe your loved one comes and talks to you and says like, hey, if I think counseling could be a really good thing, or even another healthcare professional, if you want to talk with a psychiatrist or um, there's a lot of different, there's also coaches out there that can help. Um, but sometimes our closest family and friends notice that we're struggling before we notice. So it's really important to really listen to others who know us well, so we can kind of take that into consideration that maybe they're noticing that we don't smile as often as we used to, or maybe we are making more statements about being down about ourselves. So that can be very helpful. Another sign would be if you're noticing that your usual coping skills aren't working anymore. So if you were someone who really valued exercise and were like active in exercise and you're just like really like that's not even helping anymore with managing my symptoms, um, then you might say like it's time to like get extra support. Um, Also, I would say that you can learn more coping skills within those support systems. Like if you're in therapy, there's a lot of different things you can go through. Talk about what's worked in the past, what hasn't worked in the past, anything new that you could add, and kind of developing a plan and how to implement that can be helpful, especially when we're down. It can be hard to see and be hopeful that we're even able to do those things, but we truly are more capable with support. And really, we want to be able to have the extra support. You don't have to have a reason. You can just say like it's just because that you want extra support, that you want to have more personal growth, or you want to have more self-awareness, or you want to work on maybe changing some of the thoughts about yourself that were negative and turning those into more helpful thoughts um, on a more regular basis. So it's anytime that you feel like you want extra support, it's okay to get it. And there should be no shame in getting, therapy. I think the younger generations that I'm seeing now are much more accepting and affirming of therapy. I have 20-year-olds who are like everybody, all my friends are in therapy. And so it's becoming a lot less stigmatized than it was in the past. But really, everyone will benefit from therapy at some point in their life because we all go through difficult times at some point and have really hard things that affect us. And so knowing that it's completely okay to get support is a good thing to do that and to get that. So where can you get extra support? I do have um, some resources here. So for again, like therapy is for everybody and everybody needs support at one time or another. So now more than ever, our mental health is becoming less stigmatized every day. Um, I think there's all these new apps and there's all these different ways we can get connected to therapists and to mental health advocates and resources. So one of the other things that if you are working and have a health insurance plan, sometimes the employers will offer what's called an employee assistance program or EAP. That's where you can get discounted therapy for a number of sessions. So typically it's like 3 to 4 sessions that the counseling is at no cost to you. And it's provided through your employer-based insurance. And so that's a really great way to kind of see if a therapist is in therapy is right for you, is you can use your EAP and then you can decide if you want to choose to use your insurance plan after those 3 or 4 free sessions after that. And then there's also warm lines. So I've listed some warm lines on the on the screen. So the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which is 1-800-273-TALK. You can also text the MHA to 741-741. And then they also implemented the new system, which is the 988 number, which is similar to the 911 that we have for medical emergencies. So all those options will get you to mental health resources. And just know that um, it is better to ask for help. If you ever do feel like you're having thoughts of not living or that life doesn't have any meaning or is worthless, that those are temporary feelings and thoughts that we have when we're feeling depressed. A lot of times when I talk with those about those depressive thoughts or intrusive thoughts about not living with people, I kind of give some more information about the brain. So this is your brain's way of protecting you from the pain that you're feeling. Like, and it's thinking that this is going to be helpful to not be alive anymore. Really, that's not going to be helpful. That's just a thought that your brain's trying to protect you, but it's actually causing a lot more harm than good. So we can just look at that as like, okay, that's my brain's way of escaping and avoiding this problem, but that's not a realistic or option. It is not the only option. So we can learn how to talk back to some of those thoughts. It can be helpful. But if you do have those thoughts, it is an emergency and you do need to talk to someone because we want to make sure that you're safe and that you have a safe environment and you have the supports in place while you have those thoughts and then after those thoughts have dissipated. So that way you can be more prepared if those thoughts return. Because it generally means that depression is there and that we have some things to talk about and to learn and to get out of the darkness because sometimes those thoughts are coming from a lot of feelings of shame, and that is something that no one deserves to carry on their own. So if you do have any thoughts like that, please reach out to somebody. Um, Other warm lines would be like the SAMHSA National Helpline. That helpline is a really good resource to know, like they can direct you to some community agencies, um, substance abuse treatment centers. Like that is a really great resource for that. And then the Peer Recovery Warm Line, that is through NAMI, and that's the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And those are people who struggle with their own mental health issues and are devoted to helping other people too. They've been trained to help others. And then there's the Trevor Project for those who are in the LGBT community, and then the Trans Life hotline for those who are trans. And then I also have a link to the self-care assessments. So there's a lot of exercises in that link, and it can take you to a lot of different ways to assess like how you're doing with your self-care. So I've reached the end and I want to leave plenty of time for questions for Q&A. So if you have more questions and want more information, I'm going to turn and direct you to Adrenia. So she is the coordinator of this entire training for us today. So I really want to thank her for doing that. And then thank you all for attending, and I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
Thank you, Melissa. That was really, really helpful. I know definitely to me, and I know to everyone else. So many of those things, like, yeah, that's really ticks all those boxes. Things that I need to do and typically don't. So thank you so much for that. We did have a few questions that came through sort of throughout the presentation, and I kind of put them in a Word document. So the first one was, this is not related to self-care, but is in the line of someone else sharing their story. When a person tells you his or her problems, do they expect you to help solve them? If they do, can you share that person's problem? I'm guessing with somebody else.
Mm. Uh, um, so I would first want to go into asking that person, like, are you looking for a solution or ideas for a solution for a problem? And if so, like, what are the things that you've already thought of? And then maybe I can think of other things that maybe you haven't thought of. And then maybe together we can even think of additional things. And sometimes even through conversations, like just talking about what's going on, the person themselves will be like, oh, I didn't think about this before, but I could do this, this, and this. And that could be really helpful. But I think just being honest and saying like, look, I can come up with ideas with you and it might not be exactly what's perfect for you because you're the only one that's going to be able to decide what works for you. Um, because it's your life and it's your problem that we're solving. I'm just here to support and walk through this journey with you. And maybe I can help and offer some new ideas, but maybe my ideas are really bad. Like sometimes I'm not really great at ideas. Like we can kind of see. I think it's just owning up to like we're not perfect, we're not gods, and we don't have all the answers, and that's okay. But we will be there with them on the journey. So I think coming from that place, typically you can't go wrong as long as you care about the person you're communicating that and that you're not perfect, you don't have all the answers, but you're willing to try and be supportive as possible. I don't know if that
That's
answers the question.
I thought it was great.
Okay.
The next one is, if we have communicated our boundaries, is there a good way to ask for others to share their boundaries if they do not do it automatically?
Oh, I think just saying like here, like I prefer to be asked to be touched, or I prefer to be asked before I'm touched, or I prefer to be asked before I'm hugged. What are your ideas? Like, what's your boundaries? Like, are you a hugger? Are you not a hugger? Like, you can kind of go about it in kind of like a playful thing to say, like, here's what I think, but let me tell, I want to hear about you too. Like, I'm interested. And people actually really like that because most of us like to be asked what our preferences are. Like if you come over to my house for dinner and I say, well, I have, do you want mashed potatoes or green beans or both? Like you're going to appreciate me asking you rather than me just putting stuff on your plate and assuming I know what you want. And most people like to have a voice and a choice in anything that they do. We just like it our way. So asking is always a good way to do it. Um, and I think if you can make it as like kind of light as possible, it makes it a little bit more, it's easier for people to kind of communicate it.
That's also great. And then the last one was, having trouble with good enough, trained to strive to be the best. How can I pivot?
Well, I think first is the acknowledgement that we can never be the best because there's always going to be somebody out there. I mean, better or worse or the same. Like there's 8 billion people in this world. To think that we're ever going to be the best out of 8 billion, is really unrealistic. And I think it's kind of, we have to kind of check ourselves with that and saying like, this is an unrealistic expectation that's probably causing me more stress. So how can I still have some good, reasonable standards and expectations, but not be at a place where it's detrimental to me? So again, it's really evaluating on that scale, you know, too much and too little. Where can I find the balance of what makes me comfortable, where I'm still, responsible and successful and capable, but yet I'm not driving myself to the point where I'm hurting myself emotionally or physically in order to make other people like me or to fit in or to get the validation from other people. All those things are normal things to want. It's just taken to the extreme can lead us to being pushed too far, and it takes a toll.
So then we just had one more come through the chat. Many are confused between boundaries and privacy. How can we communicate this difference?
I think they're intertwined because when we were talking about boundaries related, our emotional boundaries with what information we're going to share and what we're not going to share, privacy and boundary that is all in one and the same. Exactly this a good example would be like as a therapist, like I don't have friends. I don't have like I can't take on friends as clients. That's a boundary, the privacy. And then if I have a client, I can't add them on social media. That is a privacy issue for both the client and myself. And so setting our privacy and our what we share, what we don't share, who we let in, who we don't let in, that's all boundaries. Privacy and boundaries are the same thing.
That's great. So I think that's the last of the questions. So most of the folks that are participating this evening should have registered and train. Only if you did not, you can follow this link and I will drop it in the chat as well, or follow this QR code to complete the attendance form. Only if you didn't register and train. If you're on the phone, you can email me your attendance and I will manually record that in VBHS. We will be posting the recording and the slides on the MRC training page.